Hi everyone, my name is Evelyn Simpson and I'll be discussing the Promoting Affordable Childcare for Everyone Act. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, this is my policy brief and the act is called HR 7360. So the social problem that the act aims to address is the rising cost of childcare in the United States. And of course, many hardworking families can't keep up with the costs, so unaffordable childcare. Childcare costs often account for a large portion of a family's budget, especially for low-income families. The U.S. Department of Labor found that low-income families spend about 30% of their income per year on childcare for one child, which is crazy. Um, and families with higher annual incomes are more likely to pay for childcare than to reduce work, in order to take care of children. But even for families with higher incomes, the cost of care is still a large burden. But for low-income families in particular, the cost of childcare that can be, a huge problem as many parents are unable to access childcare and are then forced to cut necessary work hours. But even with two working parents, wages are often not enough to pay for rising costs of care, and these costs can put a strain on families, and lack of access to affordable childcare, places large financial burdens on families, may push families into poverty or further into poverty, and has negative impacts on the overall well-being of members and development of children. So HR 7360 aims to address this problem. The act was introduced in 2017. It's been reintroduced a few times since then. Most recently, it was reintroduced on April 11th, 2025. So the co-sponsors, they decided to come together to sponsor this bill because they believe that working families tend to pay for way too much for childcare, and they believe that this bill could not only help decrease the overwhelming cost of childcare, but also increase accessibility and ensure higher quality childcare. So the way that the act would work, it would be by modifying the CDCTC and DCAP, which I'll get more into. So the act may help hardworking families, especially low-income families, gain access to affordable childcare. And one of the key objectives is, gaining accessibility for low-income families because they're the hardest hit by childcare costs. And existing policies, they usually don't actually benefit them. So it would help families by strengthening existing policies to benefit, low income individuals and hardworking families in general. So yeah, I would aim to address some of these policy gaps. Okay, so the first policy that the act aims to change is the Child Independent Care Tax Credit. This credit is available to people who pay or have paid for child care of their child or other qualifying persons so that they were able to work. The amount of money families receive depends on income level and the amount of care expenses accumulated. They're allowed to claim about 20 to 25% of care expenses and a maximum of $3,000 for one person. But it does have some difficulty actually reaching low-income families because it isn't fully refundable, it isn't indexed to inflation, and the credit amounts haven't been updated in about 20 years. And childcare costs have significantly grown in the last 20 years. And since the credit is non-refundable, many low-income families, they're excluded from benefits because they don't receive the credit amount if the credit exceeds the amount of taxes owed. Um, so they can't actually reap the benefits of the credit because its value can't exceed a family's tax liability. And since many low-income families, they have little to no tax liability, they miss out on benefits. And the CDTC, it's a federal credit, but many states have their own version of it, PA being one of them, and it's currently 26 states that have their own version of the credit. So the changes that the act wants to make would be making the CDCTC fully refundable, increasing the credit rate, and also indexing it to inflation. And this would all be more suited to low-income families. Making it fully refundable would allow the credit to reach more low-income families, and families who were previously missing out on the credit because of lack of eligible expenses and lack of federal income tax liability would now actually be able to receive benefits. It would also index the credit to inflation, which would increase it each year to keep up with rising inflation costs. It also aims to raise the CDCTC credit to 50% regardless of income, and it would phase down to 35% higher income families, which would allow for families to receive larger credit amounts. And the Dependent Care Assistance Program is the other policy that the Act aims to change. It's an employer-sponsored benefit that allows employees to set aside money to pay for dependent care taxes using pre-tax dollars. The maximum amount of reimbursements for married couples and single parents is $5,000. Um, but that's still $5,000 is still not really reflective of today's childcare costs. And it can be difficult for families to actually utilize these benefits because only about 43% of workers have access to these plans because employers are not required to offer them. So HR 7360 would expand that previously $5,000 limit to 7,500 and also index it to inflation so that the limit will be reflective of rising costs over the years. Effectiveness, I think that the HR 7360 would definitely be effective in helping, low income individuals and also helping to make these credits more reflective of the rising costs. Um, because these policies regarding the affordability of childcare, they're outdated, don't reflect the rising cost of childcare. And implementation of this act will be valuable because it will allow childcare related credits and laws to rise with inflation. And I also really like the proposal to make the CDCTC fully refundable because it would actually reach low income families because they are, very much in need of childcare. So making the credit fully refundable will be very beneficial because they could actually, utilize the benefits. Um, so yeah, it could have many potential good outcomes because alleviating childcare expenses, they would reduce financial burdens and allow families to work more uninterrupted hours. It would also promote healthy child development and improve overall family functioning because it would alleviate some stressors caused by overwhelming costs of childcare by giving parents, more funds to actually access higher quality childcare and giving them more options because they'll have, more money to put towards higher quality childcare. And there are, of course, different barriers that come up, but I think that this act was definitely a step in the right direction. Um, so some policy gaps. Families actually can claim both the CDCTC and the DCAP together, even though they might need both of them, they can't claim them together. And while the CDCTC is a federal credit, it varies from state to state. So many states have their own version, some don't, but this kind of complicates eligibility requirements. And the DCAP, it's employment based. So if your employer doesn't want to offer it for whatever reason, they they don't have to. So then employees they can't participate in the DCAP. It's not guaranteed that you can get the credit. Also, one of the objectives listed in HR 7360 is to increase access to high quality childcare. And while families having more money to put towards childcare does give them more options when looking for higher quality childcare, it doesn't really guarantee, high quality childcare. And there's definitely more supports that need to be put in place to reach that. So there are a few gaps that can make it difficult for families to actually acquire promised benefits, but benefits that the act focuses on enhancing, they still aren't promised and they kind of vary state to state or by employer. But even though there are a few gaps, the changes that HR 7360 proposes, they make existing childcare policies, specifically the CDTC and the DCAP, more suitable for working families. That's it. Thank you.